Thank you, everybody, for joining us for another episode of Best Practices. With me today is Samantha Toth. She is the founder and president of Innereactive. Welcome, Samantha.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
It is my pleasure. So tell me a little bit about, before we get into the actual topic today, tell me a little bit about your history in eye care and your story.
Oh my goodness, where do I start? Back to about the time of diapers, I guess. I always just kind of, when I meet people for the first time in this industry, I let them know I was born in optical diapers. My father's an optometrist, my grandfather's an optometrist, my uncle's an optometrist. I really had no choice but to go into eye care. Uh, I started as an optician. I loved working with patients, loved working with other eye care professionals, and worked in the eye care space for about 8 years. At one point, ran a 2-location private optometric practice. And it was there that I actually fell in love with the marketing side of things. So I decided to take a break, go to Michigan State University for my bachelor's in marketing, and kind of had this weird hybrid of marketing and optical. Worked for an advertising agency outside of college and realized real quick I missed the eye care space. So quit my job, started Innereactive back in 2003. So I get the best of both worlds now. It's amazing.
That's incredible, actually. So, interested in your story. What was it about the eye care marketing piece that struck you? Why did you fall in love with that part of it in particular?
Well, after college, working at an advertising agency, I went to Michigan State. So I was working at an agency in Lansing, and it was just all about marketing, manufacturing and cars, and it was auto parts, and there's just nothing sexy about marketing, just like castings, right? Like it's really hard. And I kept thinking, man, all of these things I'm doing, eye care in the optical space as a whole, not even just eye care professionals, but lens manufacturers, frame companies, contact lens companies, laboratory, like they need these things, and very few agencies really understand the difficult challenges that we face in eye care. And shoot, the industry just keeps changing, getting more challenging. And so I felt like, hey, I've got an opportunity in a niche here to be a real asset to help the industry. It's been great.
That's absolutely right. I think that feeds directly into what we'd like to talk about here today. So the topic today is going to be best practices for creating company culture. And to your point, this industry is different than most, and it is always in flux, and sometimes that those changes are quite fast, and sometimes they take a little while to actually come to fruition. But change is always a part of everything that we do, and change is quite a difficult thing to navigate as it relates to your practices culture, to your business's culture. So help us define some terms here. What in your mind is a company culture?
Great question. There, I guess to bring an optical twist on this, there's really no magic lens that you can sell that's going to make up for a bad patient experience. And if you don't have a happy employee that starts with the patient experience, like you're not going to create happy patients. So when you start to thinking about company culture and what really defines that, it's not about just having a fun place to work. It's about having a purposeful place to work. You have to have your values need to align with the values of the company that you're working with. And when you have those things, that's what really defines what the culture is. And when you start to have employees who feel that sense of belonging, and that you hear the words like I'm part of a team come out, as opposed to, oh, my colleagues or my coworkers or my boss. You know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely. And I noticed that what you didn't say in culture is the occasional pizza party. I didn't hear you say that, right? It
yeah,
is
it's your way out of a
much
culture problem.
exactly. And it's quite holistic, right? I think there is a general understanding that a good culture has happy employees, and sure, right? But that's not it. It is that sense of belonging. It is that, and I don't think you use this word, but, and correct me if you disagree, but some sense of ownership of your role in the business is part of that culture, where a business with a good company culture doesn't have a lot of people saying that's not my job.
A
It has
hundred percent.
a lot more people saying like I will do whatever needs to get done so that we can succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are really just when it comes to having a great company culture, they're just really I always say four basic pillars, right? And these are very well known if you follow the Gallup organization, one of the companies that's very well known for helping guide companies with great company experience or with great cultures and employee experiences. But when you think of the four pillars that I believe go into a great culture, it starts with connection. Employees, that sense of belonging, that well-being, the positive team dynamics, appreciation being number two, probably. That as an employee, you feel seen, you feel recognized, you feel listened to, you feel heard, and that you're getting feedback, that you don't just feel like you're working in a silo. Three, performance. You know what's expected of you at work. You have very clear expectations. And back to that purpose and values, you know that what you do matters. It's not like you just go in and show up and you're a live body and a heartbeat kind of showing up. And growth, everybody wants to be able to grow. And the idea of, leave your personal life at the door and show up and do your job, like that's not realistic anymore. We want people to bring their whole selves to work, and we need to take care of their whole selves.
Fully agree. I think what's interesting about the four pillars that you listed is all of them also apply to any relationship, right? If you're as an individual, you want connection, you want appreciation, you want to know whether you're participating in this relationship in the way that the person you're with or the people that you surround yourself with appreciate and understand, and then you want to grow together, right? It's not like, and I think that's a big missed opportunity in these conversations is people think, well, there's company culture and then there's culture and then there are company relationships and there are relationships. It's not that way. There are relationships. That's it.
Yeah, there's probably the work thing, or the worst thing that I've heard someone say is, "Oh, they're one of my work friends." Like, what does that mean? Isn't a friend a friend? Or
Right.
should, yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's like a distinction without difference. If you have that connection with somebody, then they are a friend. If you can rely on them, then they are a friend. If they're going to help you grow, there are those things that go in together. Like this is not exactly related to company culture, but I recognized in myself that the people I value most in my life, my wife, my closest friends, the people that I enjoy working with, share a couple of characteristics. And those characteristics are really consistent. It's not something that I look for, but it ends up how it shakes out that the people I gravitate towards all share that they have a sense of humor, that they are intellectually curious, and they have a whole sense of integrity. And if you have like one of those things, we might be acquaintances and we can have a conversation. If you have two of those things, we might be a little bit closer. If you have all three of those things, I'm going to want to spend time with you. If you have none of those things, I'm going to want to stay away from you.
That's very true. It's very true. It's interesting to read, again, total geek, that it's not only my job, it's my passion, right? I can find myself get lost in some of the Gallup articles and Gallup research studies and things like that. And one of the things and one of the questions that they ask when they come in and do a complete company culture assessment is one of the questions is, do you have a best friend at work? And it seems like such a silly question, but the people who answer yes to that question, they've found connections across the board that those employees are high. There's levels of higher engagement. They are more committed to quality, and they show more ownership in their role. They care.
Right. And it is a function of that relationship, their work best friend. I mean, I'm sure no employee goes in wanting to let their employer down, but there is a massive psychological chasm between not wanting to let your employer down and not wanting to let your best friend down. And that's a big difference, and that manifests in behavior, which I think will lead into the broader conversation here. If somebody listening to this recognizes You know what? Maybe I don't have as strong a culture as I would like. Where would you suggest they begin to evaluate and then make change? Let's assume they took the most difficult step, which is admitting there's a problem. What happens next?
Ooh, that's a great question. The first step is, which is hard because like the first step is also the hardest step. So admitting there's a problem, but also knowing how hard the problem is. We talk about metrics and the importance of measuring things in every other part of our business, KPIs and this and this and this and capture rate. But how do you measure something that feels so subjective? How do you measure people's happiness? And there are companies and surveys and essentially engagement surveys that you can participate in with your team. And I will tell you, as an employer, it's excruciating sometimes to go through the process, because when you know that there's a problem, you know that you have to do the survey to figure out how bad is the problem and where do I start, because if you don't know it's broken, how do you start to fix it? So as someone who's been through it, going out, finding a company who can help you to do that research and survey your teams and put it in a safe place. Because usually one of the symptoms of a weak company culture is often lack of trust, right? They don't trust the company they're working for, yet do I lie and tell them everything's fine, or do I? So it's really I think it starts with a meeting with your team, letting them know that, hey, I think there's a culture problem. And two, I'm serious about making this a better place to work, and I'm going to take the first step, and here's what we're going to do. And I'm asking for your help. I'm asking for your honesty. It's got to be a totally anonymous survey, but get it out there, have a third party initiate it, collect the results, and then go through the feedback. Find out, it's not all bad news. You're going to go through and find out what you're doing well, but you'll also get some real specific feedback on those areas that need improvements.
First, calling out that if you're an employer, you run a practice, and you've got, let's say it's a fairly large single doc practice, you have 10 employees. If you go and ask any of them today, hey, how do you think the culture is in our business? They're going to tell you what they think you want to hear, right? Even if you've got a great relationship with them, they're not going to give you the whole truth, probably, because of the nature of your relationship, that employer employee relationship. Even if they want to be fully honest with you, they've got to be careful on how they navigate the conversation. But that anonymity that a third party survey allows will get you clearer and more actionable information. I think something that I'd like to emphasize in this, though, is when you do that, thicken up your skin. Maybe have a glass of wine before you read it, because if you ask for honesty and you receive honesty, try to receive it as the good thing that it actually is, and try not to be offended by it.
Yeah, it's real important, to your point, to have thick skin and to go into it knowing that, hey, if when you see those honest answers, give yourself a pat on the back, because that's a sure sign that your team wants it to be better too. Because they're gonna lie and they're gonna blow sunshine up your, keister, um, if they don't want it, if they've written it off. So no, that's a great thing. And two, the other silver lining there is you now know what you didn't know, and you know what you need to do to fix it. And so the second part of that is you now have the information. What are we going to do with it? Right. And so then it's about, how do we start creating connection with the employees? How do we start addressing this? How do we start building in um, ways to start focusing on those four pillars again? And how do we start having meetings? I talk about connecting through meetings that matter, because anybody can have a meeting, but what kind of meeting? What's the cadence? What's the frequency? And what are we talking about that really helps to bring us out of the funk of weak company culture and move us into a place of trust, where employees and teammates feel comfortable sharing and being a part of growth and change in a company.
It's difficult to overstate how important what you just said was, how impactful that is. I've been part of companies where I would leave virtually every meeting annoyed that the meeting we just had should have been an email. Like I could have ignored that email way easier than wasting an hour of my time listening to nothing happen. And if you're hearing this and thinking I'm being harsh about meetings, maybe I'm being a little harsh about meetings, but think about if you've had a meeting, you've taken an hour of your team's time, and you felt like nothing got accomplished. Imagine how the rest of your team felt about that. If you don't have if you're not culturally driven or agenda driven or process driven, if it's kind of aimless, you can feel it, you know it when you're in one of those meetings. I want to pivot a little bit to like a quick example of how to get buy-in from your team, that's not directly related to culture but is an example of an effective culture. So in my consulting, one of the things that we talk about fairly regularly is practice inventory, right? The frame boards. And there are best sellers and there are worst sellers, and it's easy for me to look at the numbers and I analyze the inventory and I'll say, okay, well, these aren't selling, let's get rid of them. And it's cool to say that, but if they're Joanna's favorite set of frames and I get rid of them without talking to Joanna, how's she going to feel about it? And how's she going to feel about me? And that has like a festering effect. I could, if I had a conversation, say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. What's your feedback? Or an exercise that I love to do is I get all of the opticians together and say, give me your top 5 favorite collections and your bottom 5 least favorite collections. And that way I have a sense for like the things that they really love and don't want to see go away and the things that they would love to see the back of. And it makes it a more qualitative decision where they're involved in helping decide what stays and what goes.
A couple things there. There's metrics, right? Like let's pull an inventory report, in that particular case. And you think about company culture. Well, do you want me to answer the question in terms of like how do you create buy-in with company culture, or do you want me to use the same analogy?
However you think will be easiest to understand. Whatever works
You
for
know,
you.
I think if you're trying to create buy-in with a team, regardless of the topic, that there's two things that you hit on in your frame example. There's subjective and then there's objective, right? So typically there are numbers aligned with something. So if it's frames, it's inventory, it's turn rate, it's those kind of things. But then there's how I feel about that. Well, I really like that frame rep, or this is the frame I wear, so I wouldn't want you to get rid of it. And it's something that's important to me. Or my mom wears that and she gets lots of compliments about it. So there's two sides of it, right? There's how someone feels about it. And then there's there's the turn rate. It's not selling. Like you might love it, but it's not selling. So I think that there are two different ways to kind of come at that. When you talk about it in relation to company culture, that's another reason that survey is so important is, whereas you may not bring the full details and the write-in answers to the team, transparency creates trust. So when you bring back to the team is, hey, this is where we rated ourselves as a team, everybody filled this out, and of our survey and all of the different areas that we can either exceed or meet or fall below expectations, this is where we're at. And I think setting the stage and setting a benchmark is important, that everybody understands where we're at, and then we talk about ideas on how to improve this together. So, we talk about, granted, there are components to meetings that we can talk through, and we can go through what kind of agenda is a meeting that couldn't have been an email. But, how do we do that well? But at the end of the day, the most basic parts of it is bring the data, be transparent, allow yourself to be vulnerable as a leader, as an owner of a business. That sucks. It doesn't feel good, right? But that's okay. It's okay to be vulnerable, because if you're going to be asking your team to be vulnerable as well, they've got to see you do it first.
Yeah, I think there's not enough emphasis put on how somebody feels when an idea of theirs becomes real, right? If somebody who, let's say a front desk person comes and says, hey, what if we did this? And if that idea goes completely unacknowledged, big hit to your culture. that front desk person feels ignored, and they might not say anything to you, and their work might not even change. Like, they might still be good at the front desk, but inside they're feeling unappreciated, unheard, and ignored. And that's a bummer. Just on a human level, that's a bummer. But if the opposite happens, if somebody comes to you with an idea and you hear it and you say, hey, that's awesome, let's figure out how we make that real, you give them an opportunity to stretch, to become a bigger part of your company. And then when the thing they suggested goes from a concept to a practical reality, they can't wait to give you another idea. They can't wait to make sure that idea succeeds and then make your practice even better the next time. So like, and that's assuming it's a good idea, right? Not every idea is going to be worth doing, but don't dismiss it out of hand, and don't dismiss it because of the source doesn't necessarily like a front desk person having an idea about optical doesn't mean that it's not a worthwhile idea. And a good idea can be a good idea if implemented correctly, but a good idea ignored will wreck your culture.
100%. And I think leaders who learn that the best ideas come from collaboration, and it doesn't always have to be one person's idea, but the best idea can win. It doesn't have to be one person wins. The best idea can win, right? It doesn't need to be a competition. And I think that making time to celebrate those little moments, and also learning, you made a comment earlier in this podcast about the four pillars that I mentioned, create great company culture, that those just create great relationships in general. And you think about, well, what would I do in any other relationship in my life? For my sister, my brother, my mom, my spouse. What do I do to thank them for something they did that was important to me? And is it a thank you note? Is it you know, is it a little gift? And it kind of goes back to that book, Love Languages. I think that, so many people have read that, and it talks about, how sometimes how you like to, or how you receive appreciation and you feel valued is very different than how other people do. And oftentimes the way you feel valued is oftentimes how you show appreciation. And so you have to pay close attention with other people and people on your team to really help and understand. And that can happen through one-on-ones and other kind of team-based meetings, that, connection meetings, that you can learn more about them as a person, and how do they feel appreciated? I mean, it sounds so silly, but sometimes just that question is, what makes you feel appreciated? And some people, it'll be like, write me a check. Other people, it'll be buy me a pizza. Other people, it might be write me a note. Spend time with me. Let's do something outside of the office. Take me out for a drink.
Absolutely. And there are some people who really thrive on public recognition. And then there are some people who really shrink with public recognition. And knowing who's on your team and which direction to take the conversation is invaluable, and also opaque. Unless you're laying the groundwork, like you've been talking about here, unless you've laid the groundwork with surveys, like, somebody's not going to volunteer. Oh, my love language is physical contact. Look, you can't do that at work. What else you got?
Yeah.
But there's definitely conversations to be had on how to appreciate somebody in a way that leads them to doing more of that thing, certainly, but also just being more connected with you and your business. And if you don't know that, if you're listening to this right now and you don't have a ready answer to these questions, pause. Think about that. Think about why you don't know, and think about what you could do to change that. Okay, we've paused. I think there's a lot that a lot of other things that go into company culture that is also often missed. In addition to not properly understanding your team that you already have, I think a lot of culture misses happen during the hiring process, where, like you mentioned a couple of times, purpose, values, belonging, like that, those alignments are really important. But a lot of practices, when they hire, it's an emergency. Like, they're trying to put out a fire by bringing somebody in, and that on its own is a big cultural hit. But then making the wrong hire is an even bigger, longer lasting cultural hit. What's your advice for somebody who's run into this and wants to avoid it, or somebody who hasn't run into this yet and should avoid it?
Oh man, Steve, that's a tough question. I mean, we've all done it, right? We've all hired the wrong person. And thinking back and speaking through my own personal experience of hiring the wrong person, um, I I go back and I ask myself, did I really see the red flags? Because I think I did. And I think that I rushed myself. I think that I was willing to overlook certain things. And two, what I've really learned as I've gotten better about hiring and I focus more on company culture, is I've really changed the questions that I've asked. A lot of the questions that I've asked now specifically tie in with our company's mission, with our company's core values, with our company's vision. And not that they're not, do you know how to write social media posts? Like, what would you write for said topic? Those aren't the kind of questions that we ask. When we talk about, tell me about a time that wasn't ideal. And then you build a case for something that would happen in that role, in that job. Tell me how you would handle this. Like, what would you do? What would you say to the client? What would you say to this? So if there's an eye care professional out there listening and they've had challenges in the past and maybe you've made the wrong hire, think about some of the skills that you'd be looking for, some of the core values that are the most important to the practice that you want to make sure that the person exudes, and ask questions related to things that have gone wrong. And in other cases, and how they would solve it. How would they handle that? Another, to tie that back to company culture, is you don't want to be one of those managers or owners that has to chase your employees all the way around all the time and micromanage, and they constantly need to get approval from a supervisor or the team leader, whatever. You want to empower and trust and have confidence in your teammates and your employees that they're going to make the right decision. They're going to do what's best for the patient without having to quick check in with you, and that they should feel the confidence that you're going to support them and stand behind that decision, right? Like, all of those things tie into company culture. And I think at the end of the day, it's a gut check. If they go through, they said all the right things, and they answer all the questions, and it feels like a core value fit. You can oftentimes teach skills that might be missing, but at the end of the day, someone's values are aligned or they're not. And what does your gut tell you? Really trust some of those gut feelings, because the times I haven't trusted mine, it's come back and it's bit me.
So at Anagram, when we're hiring, we have a general rule: any hesitation is a no. Right? If you're in a conversation, we try to be pretty robust in our hiring. We have a couple of layers of a couple of conversations, and if at any point in those conversations anybody doing the interview has any hesitation, it's just not a good use of anybody's time. If it's not a hard yes, you should probably pass. And this is not because we want to be harsh, and not because we think like we're the only company to work for or anything like that. It's just a better use of even the candidate's time, right? If they've got all of the bona fides that we're looking for and said some of the right things, but there is like even not a red flag, but like a yellow flag. If we hire them and then we discover, oh, we were right, we will have wasted their time and our time and be back at square one having to hire again. So yeah, I think know who you are, know what your practice wants to be, what your business wants to be, and have that reflected in the things that you're asking during the interview process. Something that's always in my head when I'm hiring is, do I want to talk to this person every day? Like, something as simple as that. If do I think I'll enjoy seeing them in meetings regularly? Do I think I'll enjoy walking in and saying hello? Or are they, I don't know, boring or whatever? Like, intangible things like that. And maybe that's unfair, but if I find them dull or whatever, then I'm going to be annoying for them to work with. That's not even their problem. It's my problem. I recognize that, but it is something that is the practical reality. If I hire somebody who I'm going to annoy, it's not going to go well.
Yeah, I've heard even hiring managers and well, you don't have to work with them. So whoa, whoa, whoa. We all work together. We're all on the team. Like, well, you don't have to work with them. Like, that's not an appropriate response, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of an abdication of responsibility. Like I'm not hiring them to work at some separate company. They're part of this team. So, yeah, you're working with them. So, no, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Let's go to the flip side of this because I think there is another cultural hit that you can take if, let's say, you hired somebody who was all green flags and they worked out for years and years, and then suddenly behavior change, something happens them with them personally, and the quality of their work changes. Obviously, that's going to have a negative impact on the business and the culture, and there should be a process in place to recognize that based on general like employee management stuff. But what I often think is missed is if there's an employee on your team that appears to get special treatment, appears to get more leniency when they make these kinds of costly errors, or appears to get no repercussions for making patients angry or getting negative reviews on Google or what have you. If I'm working in a practice and I see somebody getting special treatment, I'm going to feel slighted and probably be less connected to everything that I do as a result of that. Now, once or twice, probably fine, but if it becomes a chronic behavior thing, how should a practice owner recognize that? How can they recognize that? And how can they avoid that in the future?
Oh, it completely kills morale. And it can be, I mean, they joke about one bad apple, right, can ruin the bushel. I mean, it's true with the company culture that there have been times where, there have been some nasty things that happen that you've got to just cut the cord and let someone go. Now, I don't mean if that one thing happens, they get a bad review, go fire that person. But what you just described is not something that happens overnight. So I guess let's kind of start with what measures do you put in place to prevent them? Because the measures that you put in to prevent them are the same solution to building a strong culture. And it, are you ready for this? Goes back to meetings. But it's meetings that matter, and I really can't talk about that enough. That we differentiate. Excuse me. This is true for what we do as a company, as well as what we coach other companies that we work with to do. Is that we recommend having, that we call them. We label them differently. We have team meetings, which is a time when everybody's present. So everybody from the team is present. So like an all staff meeting is what I've heard them referred to in other company cultures. But then we also have something called one-on-ones. And I think the one-on-ones are oftentimes the most missed and the most impactful opportunities for company culture and to prevent what you just talked about. Because those kind of problems with employees who start to fall off, or maybe they're going through something in their personal life or whatever, but that doesn't happen overnight. It's usually a trickle effect, and it's little bit by little bit by little bit by little bit. And if their manager, so I guess let's talk through which each of the structured meetings kind of look like. So a weekly team meeting, or we do ours weekly, is all hands on deck, right? So we have everybody show up, we keep it short, sweet, to the point. It's a quick focus, and we literally have a structured agenda. It's going to be different for every practice based on what theirs are, but I guess to generalize, we focus a short time of the meeting, half an hour, on priorities, collaborations, red light, green light. These things are going well. These things are not going well. Then we have a separate part of the meeting that we talk about team wins. We have a separate part where we talk about team challenges. And then we have an opportunity like, hey, there was a new product launch or this rep was in. So there's like a focused learning opportunity each week. And then last, it's not just one person's job to run that meeting. So we actually share that responsibility, because if that's one person's job every single week, that can get daunting. But also we've noticed that teams can kind of sometimes get lazy, but when you take turns running it, it forces accountability and you make sure that you come prepared to talk about those things. So that's kind of our team meeting. But the one-on-one manager,
Sorry to interrupt, but I want
no,
to just highlight the value of that rotating ownership, right? It not only it adds ownership and makes the meetings a little bit different each time, but it actually teaches people how difficult it is to run a meeting, and I think that is unseen until you're forced to do it.
and to your point, I think sometimes people say, well, I'm not comfortable doing that. And when there's a structured agenda, or I don't like to talk in public, or I don't like, so, and some of that is, to be honest, part of building your team's confidence and part of trusting the other people. Nobody on that team is going to tear another team member down. So I think some of that is to your point, it's a stretch, right? Nobody grows in their comfort zone. So when you encourage your team to stretch, everybody grows. Um, Kind of moving on to the one-on-one meetings. A one-on-one meeting is when you've got every member of the team who has a direct report. So if that's the manager, if it's a team lead, it might look different depending on which role or how the practice is structured. But essentially, it's a pulse check. It's a check-in. We started doing our one-on-ones every single week. We then moved to, when it felt like we didn't have enough to talk about, we moved to every other week. Then we've gone through times where it's been once a month. There have been other times where somebody's going through a hard time, and where there have been times where I've adjusted my one-on-ones that, maybe one employee, the right touch point for them, and you can kind of feel it, right? That it's every 2 weeks, and then I've got another one that I meet every week, and then there's another one that I do once a month. But you can feel the connection, and the goal of that is, and I'll kind of go through what we talk about on those meetings, but when you stay connected weekly or bi-weekly or monthly, things aren't spiraling out of control to the point that you've got a bad apple in the bushel. You saw that apple change in color if you were doing these check-ins and the one-on-ones. So usually you can redirect and shift and have conversations about that along the way as it's happening, and you don't see it go all the way sideways. If you're doing the one-on-ones and it still goes sideways, then your choice is clear.
Gosh, that is so valuable. Just the different kinds of structures, the willingness to be flexible. That sometimes one-on-ones should happen more frequently with certain employees. Sometimes you can do it a little bit less frequently, as long as you don't lose sight of whether a bad apple has entered your bushel, as the case might be. I think it's also really important. So I do something kind of similar where we have, at Anagram, we have a monthly all hands meeting. So it's all hands on deck. Everybody in the company is in. We have a slide deck prepared. We go over important milestones and metrics and what's coming next, as just a mechanism for everybody on the team to know what's happening and what we're thinking, and invite questions and all of that stuff. Then I have one-on-ones with everybody on the team, and those one-on-ones, I try to make as explicit as possible that they're not my meeting, right? It is our meeting. And we do a shared Google Doc where I ask people to put, if we're going to come in, I'm going to put my notes, you put your notes in whenever you have them. And then when we come into the meeting, we each have our agenda points to discuss, and they happen in whatever order they were put in the document. And that way, it's very practically not a meeting that I'm insisting on. It's a meeting that we've agreed to have together. And
Yeah,
it
that's
changes the
awesome.
dynamic.
It does. It does. The structure. So what you referred to is like your all team or all hands on deck. Again, that's what we call our full team meetings. And the cadence, again, for each company is a little bit different. When we work with practices, we consult with them to figure out what works best in their groove. But for the one-on-ones, we use that as each agenda is different depending on the company, the practice, but it's not only an opportunity to do a personal check-in. How's your family? How's your kids? Your kids are starting back to school, or they're, somebody's getting married. What's going on in their personal life, so that you can make sure to stay connected that way. We use it as a progress on goals. So, we call them WIGs, wildly important goals. what goals do we have set in place that they're directly attributing to, or which projects are they working on? And let's do a progress check on those things. Maybe we have capture rate goals. Maybe we have, you know, um, whatever they might be with the practice, average selling price goals, whatever it might be. That's an opportunity to check in progress. And then let's talk about, like, hey, your capture rate is less than what we had planned, or we saw a dip last month. Let's talk about that. What obstacles, what support can I provide you? And then strengths based feedback. So some of these things, when you start to see things go sideways, when you work off a specific agenda related to that, each check-in, and then there's also a place to kind of ad lib or fill in if, like, hey, there's something you just want to talk about, making room for that as well. And man, the result of that, it sounds like it's been for Anagram too, is the not just the trust that you build, but the safety that if they're willing to come to you and talk to you about the family stuff and this, then, if something's going on that they're going to bring to work and maybe you see performance suffer, if you come to them and say, hey, tell me what's going on, they're going to allow themselves to be vulnerable and trust you enough because of the other trust you built through those one-on-ones.
And I want to call back what you said a little bit earlier on, that transparency builds trust. I think is such an important point that a lot of people don't even think about how to build trust at all. They just assume that it's going to happen over time. Spoiler alert, it is not going to happen over time on its own. It takes a lot of effort. And another thing that you've got to think about as a practice manager or an owner is, if you're hiring somebody who's had a job before, you're not just dealing with their relationship with you, like your new hire's relationship with you. You're dealing with all of the trauma that they brought with them. And when I tell a new hire sometimes, like, hey, I'd love for you to be fully honest with me, or you've got PTO, please do take it. I have to convince them that, like, I mean it. I'm not here. You're not gonna get in trouble for taking time off. Please take time off, or what have you. And employees, they're not trying to be obstinate about it. They just legit have trauma from previous relationships. Like, it's a genuine thing. People are people. They're going to cope in the best way that they can. So you've got to build that trust over time to the point where eventually, through those one-on-ones, especially if you do them the way that you described, you build that trust. You ask about how they are as an entire person, not just employee number 4, right? But like their whole person. The nature and tenor and reality of the conversation that you have is then fundamentally different.
I throw in some questions just to keep them guessing sometimes, right into the one-on-ones. And some of my favorite questions have been, and I mentioned earlier, so what makes you feel most appreciated? Because that changes sometimes depending on how long that company's been, or that team member's been with the company. The other thing is, what do you love most about this company? Or what do you love most about coming into work every day? I mean, that's another one where you sometimes will get answers to that question that you didn't even see coming. I've had silly things as much as, I love that when you bring in bagels. Okay, noted. That's like the cheapest thing I can do to help people love to come to work every day. I once had someone, to your point about, baggage from other employers and other relationships. I once had someone, what's your favorite part of working here? I love that I don't come to work every day and cry. And my heart just broke as I thought, well, thank you, but let's talk about where you worked before. Oh my goodness. So, I mean, to your point, that when you start to provide time for that individualized coaching, so not just but what you find in terms of providing coaching and support side of things, I mean, it's tough to leave a relationship. It's easy to leave a job. It's tough to leave a relationship.
Right. Oh, man. Well, Samantha, I can't thank you enough for this conversation. I've learned a ton. I'm sure our listeners have as well. I want to ask you kind of a 2-part question. Part 1, any parting thoughts for this episode? And then part 2, tell the listeners a little bit about Innereactive and how they might get in touch with you.
Ooh, parting thoughts. You're never too far gone, right? If you feel like you're at the bottom, you feel like everybody's fighting, you just should fire your whole staff and just start over. I've talked to a lot of business owners where that's how you feel. And sometimes you just have bad days, right? But you can always, you got to start somewhere. So never beat yourself up too much. But I think you did a great job, Steve, of kind of outlining what you need to do to start taking the steps to improve company culture. And it just starts with the ability to be humble and say, I want to make a change. There's nothing special. You just got to be determined and focus on making the change. A little bit about Innereactive. We're a full service marketing company that specializes in the optical industry as a whole. We've had the absolute honor of working with laboratories, lens frame manufacturers, contact lens manufacturers, and eye care practices all over the country to help them, whether it's who is my target and how do I reach them through a variety of both print and digital social media web, to company culture. We've not only have won awards for our own company culture, but we get excited about helping other people improve theirs.
Excellent. And how would somebody reach out to you?
Best way to reach out is check out our website, innereactive.com, or always my email address, which if we can attach this to the podcast, but it's Samantha.Toth at innereactive.com.
Excellent. Samantha, again, I can't thank you enough. I want to leave with one parting thought because we touched on this concept a couple of times, and I'm an all-purpose nerd, so I'm going to throw this in every chance I get. We talked about that the first step you need to take is to acknowledge that there's a problem, and then every step that follows. But there's a fantasy author that I really like named Brandon Sanderson, and in one of his books, there's a quote from a character that is, the most important step you can take isn't the first one, it's the next one, always the next one. So taking the first step is great and monumental and heavy, but that next step that you take, always the next step that you take, should be driving you into the direction that you want to go. Samantha, thank you. Everybody, thank you for listening to Best Practices. I've been Steve Alexander, Head of Growth at Anagram. Thank you very much.